Meher Baba and Mental Suffering. Reflections on the Satara automobile accident. Meher Baba's universal work. Although we may never fully comprehend Meher Baba's universal work, we may at least speculate on some aspects of his work. The aspect of his work that we speculate on in this presentation is mental suffering. By mental suffering, I mean the mental suffering that Meher Baba himself endured, as well as the mental suffering of his followers, brought about by his two automobile accidents in the 1950s. The mental suffering of his followers continues to this day as we all try to comprehend the depth and significance of Meher Baba's suffering during the last 17 years of his life. Throughout his lifetime, Meher Baba emphasized over and over again how the suffering of the avatar is an important aspect of the avatar's work. He emphasized three different types of suffering: physical, mental, and spiritual suffering. As he said in June 1964, quote, "I carry the universal burden, and I suffer physically, mentally, and spiritually. My physical suffering is seen by those around me. My mental suffering is intense, infinite. As for my spiritual suffering, it is ad infinitum. When I break my silence, it will be the end of suffering." Close quote. Earlier, in 1939, Meher Baba explained that, quote, "The avatar has to incur upon himself the infinite burden of worries of the entire suffering world, while working in the world for the spiritual upliftment of humanity. This suffering of people steeped in the darkness of ignorance becomes the avatar's suffering. This is his crucifixion. The avatar is crucified every moment of his life on earth." Close quote. Well, if we accept the premise that Meher Baba, as the avatar, works, as he says, in the world for the spiritual upliftment of humanity, the question naturally arises, what is the nature of this work that the avatar does? Meher Baba has explained on many occasions that the work he does is accomplished in the inner world through various spiritual means at his disposal as the avatar. In 1931, speaking to some of his Western followers, Baba said, quote, "It is absolutely impossible for an ordinary man to understand my work. With my universal mind, I work on an unlimited scale for the universe. To understand what I do is not within the bounds of human intellect. I do my work through various mediums. With that object in mind, I visit places, see different sights, or go to plays, films, and do 101 other things. But I don't enjoy movies or plays as you do. I make them the medium of my inner spiritual work. My every breath does this work constantly, while outwardly you find me doing nothing special. You cannot grasp the internal mystery." Close quote. So, although Baba says that we cannot understand his work, at the same time, he explains that he does his work through various mediums. He explains in this quote that by visiting places, seeing sights, going to films, etc., he uses these experiences as mediums for his work. For people unfamiliar with Meher Baba, this idea is often difficult to accept. For those who have had some experience with Meher Baba, however, the idea of Meher Baba working with different people, places, and situations as mediums for his work makes a kind of intuitive sense. Explaining his work with the musts, or God intoxicated, Baba goes into further detail about working with these unique individuals as a medium for his work. As Baba says, quote, "Because of his being stationed on the inner planes, which are free from the limitations and handicaps of the gross world, a must can be and often is in contact with a far greater number of souls than is possible for an ordinary person. Must mind is a nucleus of conscious formations with innumerable and far-reaching links. A must can therefore be a more effective agent for spiritual work than the most able persons of the gross world. The must mind is also often used directly by the Master as a medium for sending his spiritual help to different parts of the world. Very often, when the Master is helping a must, he is also helping the world through him at that very time." Close quote. Along these same lines, Meher Baba's sister Mani has observed how Baba used different people as mediums for different phases of his work. Jokingly commenting on the difficulties that Baba had when working with the Western women, Mani has said, quote, "Baba worked so many years with the men mandali, so many years with the boys, so many years with the mad and musts, and then with the women. Oh, to have worked with the women. Baba didn't say so, but he implied, never again." Close quote. Well, aside from the humorous note that Mani expresses here, she seems to take it for granted that Baba was using each of these different groups of people, the men mandali, the Meher and Prem Ashram boys, the mad and musts, as well as the Western women, as mediums for his work. Elsewhere, Meher Baba indicates that his beloved Mera was a medium for his work, for in his work she represented the universe. There are many other references elsewhere in the literature where Baba indicates his use of people, places, and situations as mediums for his work. Now, I've gone into some detail about Meher Baba's work and his use of the people, places, and situations around him as mediums for his work because in this presentation I want to emphasize what I feel to be an important aspect of what Meher Baba called his universal work. The aspect of his work that I want to focus on is his work on mental suffering in the world at large. I want to suggest the idea that through the medium of his own mental suffering, the mental suffering of his mandali, and the mental suffering of his followers, Meher Baba worked on the emotional trauma and mental suffering of human beings around the world. The role of automobile accidents in Meher Baba's work. Well, attempting to understand and grasp the significance of Meher Baba's 2 automobile accidents is perhaps the most challenging aspect of Meher Baba's life and work. The first accident occurred just outside of Prague, Oklahoma, in the United States on May 24, 1952. The second occurred 4 years later near Satara, India, on December 2nd, 1956. Meher Baba's closest followers at the time gave little thought to the question of why someone who they felt to be the all-seeing, all-knowing human incarnation of God on earth should necessarily be subjected to such brutal suffering. For them, the only thing that mattered was that someone they loved deeply had been grievously injured, along with several of his closest disciples. Meher Baba repeatedly referred to each of these 2 accidents as necessary and integral parts of his work. Pointing to his damaged hip after the Satara accident, he said, quote, "The suffering of the whole universe is concentrated on this little spot. This is a tangible expression of the universal suffering I bear." Close quote. He then followed this statement by saying, quote, "I am happy. It is as I wanted it." Close quote. Indeed, immediately following the Satara accident, while Meher Baba was still covered with his own blood, 2 of his disciples, Vishnu Durarukakar and Bhau Kalchuri, both remarked that Baba looked radiant, like a warrior who had just achieved a great victory.
And what did I find? That Baba was full of blood, and he was glorious, as if he won some battle. so happy, cheerful, and that glory shining, shining. And Baba looked at me, means go back.
Although those of us who are devoted to Meher Baba may accept the interpretation of these accidents as a part of Meher Baba's universal work, for those outside of the immediate orbit of Meher Baba's love and influence, the Satara accident was not seen as a great victory. It was seen rather as a great humiliation. The Satara accident seemed to many to be proof that Meher Baba was not a great spiritual master, let alone the avatar, but simply an ordinary man making extraordinary claims about himself. According to Meher Baba, however, this was the expected response. Baba had repeatedly spoken about the necessary humiliation of the avatar. In fact, several months prior to the December 2nd, 1956 accident, Baba sent out a circular regarding his expected humiliation. In Life Circular number 29, he said, quote, "As declared in the past, I am free from promises and am not bound by time and space. Though all happenings are in the realm of illusion, a great so-called tragedy is facing me and my lovers. My long-expected humiliation is near at hand. This may happen tomorrow or any day of this year, or it may happen next year. The love, courage, and faith of my lovers will be put to severe test, not by me, but by divine law. Those who hold fast to me at the zenith of this crisis will transcend illusion and abide in reality. I want my lovers to rest assured that my humiliation and tragedy, though necessary, are but passing phases which are bound to have a glorious end, as is destined. My love to all." Close quote. Later, several months after the accident, in May of 1957, he said, quote, "Only the avatar, whenever he lives amidst mankind, has to undergo humiliation. When there are 5 perfect masters who are God personified and who control and look after the affairs of the universe, what need is there for them to precipitate the incarnation of God on earth? They bring him down to shoulder the sufferings of humanity. The 5 perfect masters are not as much scandalized and humiliated as the avatar. I have been made to take this human form by the 5 perfect masters of this age, to bear the cross and to undergo humiliation." Close quote. The automobile accidents and mental suffering. Well, typically when discussing Meher Baba's 2 automobile accidents, we tend to focus on his physical injuries, and then we discuss how his physical suffering was part of his role as avatar to take on the suffering of the world. These are certainly important points which deserve our close study and attention. In this presentation, however, I want to focus on the role of mental suffering and emotional trauma in connection with Meher Baba's work. In the more than 60 years since Meher Baba's Satara automobile accident, the scientific study of mental suffering in the form of emotional trauma has advanced enormously. In the past, veterans returning from war who showed symptoms of emotional distress were diagnosed as being shell shock. Later, terms like battle fatigue were used. However, after the Vietnam War, so many returning American soldiers exhibited serious emotional distress that more attention began to be paid to the problem of emotional trauma and its lasting impact on individuals and society. In the decades since the end of the Vietnam War, more and more study has been devoted to trauma and its emotional and physiological impact on individuals. Trauma is now recognized as a serious emotional injury which impacts the central nervous system, resulting in not only serious emotional distress for the patient, but also often resulting in difficult to diagnose medical symptoms as well. Trauma is now recognized as originating from a variety of sources in addition to the obvious traumatic effects of war. Childhood abuse, domestic violence, sexual abuse, rape, as well as traffic and automobile accidents have all been recognized as significant drivers of emotional trauma in individuals. With over 1 million traffic deaths globally every year and many, many millions of serious traffic-related injuries every year, traffic accidents have been identified globally as a major source of traumatic emotional distress. Trauma has also been shown to have deep and lasting emotional and physiological effects not only on the survivors of trauma themselves, but also on the caregivers and those closely connected to the survivors of trauma. According to one source, quote, "Many caregivers do not have the luxury of moving into their roles along a gradual learning curve. To the contrary, many are thrust into this role with no notice. Whether it is the sudden heart attack, stroke, diagnosis of a cognitive disorder, etc., many caregivers begin their journey in the wake of a traumatic event to a loved one that leaves them reeling and experiencing many of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. These include unwanted upsetting memories, nightmares, flashbacks, emotional distress after exposure to traumatic reminders, physical reactivity after exposure to traumatic reminders. The unofficial diagnosis for these folks is best described as post-traumatic caregiving," close quote. Being thrust into the role of caregiver with no advance notice was exactly the situation that Meher Baba's mandali found themselves in when he arrived in a strange car covered in blood minutes after the 1956 Satara accident. Even decades later, we can still see the emotional distress on Dr. Goher Irani's face and hear it in her voice as she recounts that terrible experience.
And we just couldn't believe it that Baba had another accident. And see, Baba, we didn't even know what was happening to Baba, whether he could stand or he could walk. And there was nobody there. Neelu had died, Erich wasn't available, Pendu was in the hospital, they were all taken to the civil hospital, state hospital. Only Vishnu came and he was in a shocked state, he didn't know what. And money ran. Vishnu said that something has happened to Baba. So all women brought a chair near the car and helped Baba sit in the chair and carried the chair to the bedroom. Later we discovered that he had broken his hip joint. Baba had his foot up, and see, you call it the dashboard, where in the front seat he was sitting next to Erich, and he had his knee up like this, and his foot was resting on the seat. So that jerk, against the dashboard, it pushed his whole femur backwards. So the upper part of the asset of the socket, was broken. And we were not sure which part is really broken, whether the head is broken or whether it's cracked or any circulation. So Don was very concerned about that. Anyway, when we took Baba to his bedroom and made him rest, and in the meantime Mani ran to the Mandali's bungalow, told Don. Don came, and he went to the hospital, called the civil surgeon, and they wanted to take an X-ray of Baba, so we took him to the civil hospital. I accompanied Baba because Don had to do other things. And Baba, this accident in 56, the whole of Baba's right side was injured. In the 52, his left arm and left leg. And the 56 one is the whole of his right side, right from the face down. See, he also bit his tongue, and his tongue was cut, a triangular in front tip of the tongue. The gums were cut across. There were wounds on his eyes, and just under, he just missed cutting into the eyeball. On the chin, it was a painful sight to see Baba like this. And Baba stayed very calm and quiet throughout. And then we said, Baba, we'll have to take you to the hospital. It was a horrible hospital. But anyway, Don said this is the only place. So an ambulance came and we carried Baba to the hospital. And they put on a plaster cast right from the lower part of the abdomen right up to the toe. And it was a very most uncomfortable. So, and then see the tongue part which was broken, cut, it had to be sutured. So we took Baba to the operation theatre, and the civil surgeon wanted to stitch it up, and Don wasn't anywhere around. I was wondering, where is Don, what is happening to him? I was all alone with Baba, there was no one else, no other mandali was there, and Don was busy trying to read Baba's x-rays to find out what exactly was the matter, what part of the bone was broken. So I stood by Baba's side, and no anesthesia was given, but Baba held my hand and he said, hold my hand, and he said, see that I don't produce a sound. If I produce a sound, you make me aware of it by holding my hand tighter. You know. So I was there by his side holding his hand, and nothing, no sound was produced. And the suturing was done. At several places suturing was done.
One of the most extraordinary facts of Meher Baba's quite extraordinary human life is that in both accidents his tongue was badly cut, apparently from clamping down on it so as to maintain his vow of silence. As Dr. Goher reports, no sound was produced by Meher Baba after the Satara accident, despite Baba's considerable pain while being sutured without anesthetic. Likewise, Dr. Ned Burleson of Prague, Oklahoma, was astonished to learn that Meher Baba's silence, despite the extraordinary pain he was experiencing, was due to an extraordinary act of human self-discipline. Other members of Meher Baba's mandali, or close disciples, were also deeply distressed by the Satara accident. Ersh Jesawala, who was the driver of the car, reports on his own emotional distress.
As soon as I entered, Baba is lying in bed with his leg in traction or something like that, and from there, seeing me, he gives this signal. So he says to me, means I could follow the signal. He says, well, you wanted to see that the car should be dashed against the tree, and are you satisfied now? This is how I am received, you see. And I just look ashamed, you see. I don't know what to say. I am so grieved and all that. And I am really very grieved because I am the cause of all this. I feel that way, still feel that way. But as days roll by and all that, again the Comforter is there. He comforts me and says, why are you so presumptuous to feel and even to think like this, that you are the cause of it? Why do you say that? Who is the cause? You are not the cause. I am the cause. You are just an instrument. Yes, I said, Baba, you may say whatever you like, but I do feel it. I know it. You see, I see him so helpless like that, and it grieved me. it was really very painful to see these things. And time and again Baba will say, you'll see me walking and all that. Many things happen, time passes by, time is a great healer also, but this wound has not healed at all. It was an impact on me, on my heart, on my mind, and on my understanding.
Another mandali member who was in the car during the Satara accident, Vishnu Deyarukakar, though not physically injured, received such an emotional shock that immediately afterwards he began to experience heart trouble. His health continued to deteriorate and Vishnu eventually died of a heart attack a few years later. One of the Lady Mandali, Mehru Irani, visited the accident site many years after the event and described Vishnu's experience.
What Vishnu remembers of the occasion was that Baba had such a satisfactory expression on his face that you get from having achieved successfully a very difficult task. And he had seen Baba's universal form, the same form that Krishna had revealed to Arjuna on the battlefield. And I think from that time, just the force of his presence and the whole thing of the accident and the power of Baba's thing was a shock to him. And from that day, his heart was affected. In 62, he passed away in Guru Prasad through heart attack, through heart failure. So after that time, he was not able to do the bazaar duties that he used to do before as his health deteriorated. But he had said, please don't ever take the duty away from me of doing night duty for Baba, which he did till the end.
Dr. Goher Irani was especially affected because her medical duties exposed her almost constantly to Meher Baba's suffering. Because of his numerous wounds, Baba was at constant risk of infection. Because of this, Dr. Goher was required to repeatedly give Baba penicillin shots. Goher found this task particularly distressing.
I was very hesitant to put a needle in Baba. And it reminded me of a song Baba had written, a Gujarati song in the early 20s, And Baba said how Christ and how Zoroaster suffered. And Baba once said that I'll be made into minced meat. And so I don't know why I connected that with me. And I said, here I'm pricking him and cutting his muscle into bits, by all these pricks that I'm giving him. And that used to upset me and worry me so much. And I was always very apprehensive, just to pain me tremendously. So much so that except for this or taking care of Baba or looking after him, I wasn't observant of anything that was happening around me. And therefore people, when they ask me, what did you do in your 22 years of close contact with Baba? I said, I don't remember anything. Except for the medical part that I've done, I don't remember anything that happened besides this, because after the 52 accident, all that I've seen is that Baba's suffering. Baba used to suffer so much, used to be in pain so much. Every time for us who were near to him, we saw Baba, so much of Baba's pain and his suffering all the time. We knew that for the darshan he had to bring out his divinity and his glory and all that. But as a human, with his human body, he was suffering tremendously. Baba would look so sad, depressed, so much in pain, and as if the whole burden of the whole world was on him. And that used to hurt us a lot. We would try to make him as comfortable as possible, but that was not within our scope or within our limits. It was not possible. Baba had to bear this burden, and we knew it.
One of the signs of post-traumatic caregiver distress listed previously was emotional distress after exposure to traumatic reminders. Mehru Irani was visibly distressed after her visit to the Satara accident site, as we can clearly see in this later interview.
Baba would want us to be there, to have someone there. You know, the hard time, the difficult time he was going through, he was wanting us to be there and share it with him. Here was Baba, who was so active, so energetic, so vital. I mean, to see him there, helpless on the bed, depending on Mara and all of us. Especially on Mara, he would look to for any little thing that he needed, any help he needed. And I remember one time that he had us all gathered around him and told us to stand and look at him. Look at him. And you could feel that it was a very special time. There was a very special reason for it. And you see the pain on his face, the silence. It was not the physical pain of the moment, but I think what he saw ahead, what he would be going through. And tears came down his face. Tears rolled down his eyes. I couldn't look at his face. As he said, look at me. So I just looked at his body rather than his face. But I knew what was happening. And, just that silent action like that showed us in a way the depth of what his suffering was, that he didn't show to others, that silent, but we had the privilege, the thing of being able to see him do it. But I just want to say that accident not only affected the mandali so much, but what an effect it had on Baba's whole routine and life at that time. That he never ever walked without pain. The fact that he was walking was a miracle in itself. The doctor said that he had done his own operation, his own surgery to be able to walk like that. And so often if a little bit of the grit came, interfered with the socket joint over there, it would be so painful. And you could feel it. You could see it and how much Baba was suffering. And we realized that what Baba had done to himself was put an extra binding on himself. The time he talked about spending time in prison, or going to jail and all, you realize that he had put these bindings on himself still further, that he was going through a more difficult period of jail than anybody who in prison could be, because walking was such an outlet for him. When he was restless, when he was working, he would stride back and forth to the mandali or in the house, to the veranda and everywhere like that. And you realize that everything of that was changed. And he would say during those days that Christ suffered on the cross once. For me, it is a daily crucifixion. Not only has he bound himself by silence all these years, but walking has been such an important part of his life, and he's put that extra binding on himself. And we feel that all this he did for the good of mankind. The pain he took on this universal joint was like the pain he took on for all the universe like that. And in Meherazad, when I came back after visiting the site of the accident, the full force of what Baba had gone through came to me like that. Jai Baba.
Meher Baba's mental suffering after the Satara accident. As the avatar of the age, one would naturally think that Meher Baba himself would be immune from the effects of traumatic emotional distress. Certainly any other human being would be both distressed and alarmed by the brutality with which Meher Baba's body was assaulted in the Satara accident. One would think his divine status might protect him from emotional distress as we know it. However, the answer is not so clear. As Meher Baba himself said in March 1963, quote, "Although I have infinite knowledge, infinite power, and infinite bliss at my disposal as the God-man, I do not use my infinite power and bliss for my avataric work. Otherwise, how could I experience the helplessness of the whole world? I suffer infinitely for humanity to relieve them of suffering, for it is for their sake that I specially come as avatar. I suffer tremendously physically. This is why my body was completely shattered in 2 automobile accidents. My mental suffering, too, is infinite, as I suffer for all the hypocrisy in the world, for all hypocritical saints. Lastly, I suffer infinitely spiritually because even though I myself am completely free, I experience myself as bound in all men in ignorance." Close quote. Even if Meher Baba, as the avatar, had availed himself of his access to infinite bliss, recent scientific research into the effects of chronic and unrelenting pain on human physiology suggests that some of Meher Baba's medical problems might have resulted from the stress of constant chronic pain. One medical expert on the effects of trauma and stress on the human body, Dr. Robert Scare, reports that the stress of constant pain can rewire the brain and central nervous system in ways that affect the immune system and can result in difficult-to-diagnose medical complaints. According to Dr. Scare, quote, "Alteration of the immune system has been one of the more thoroughly studied examples of the health effects of inordinate stress," close quote. Dr. Scare specializes in traumatic responses in the survivors of automobile accidents. As he says, quote, "Exposure to stress, trauma, and the process of traumatization has profound effects on the brain and the endocrine system. This effect soon begins to have deleterious and ultimately long-standing effects on neuronal structure and function." Close quote. Although we can never know if the stress of chronic pain contributed to Meher Baba's ongoing health problems during the final 12 years of his life, there exists mountains of evidence which suggest that this may have been precisely the case. Why automobile accidents and trauma? Even if we accept the premise of my earlier suggestion that through the medium of his own mental suffering, the mental suffering of his mandali, and the mental suffering of his followers, Meher Baba worked on the emotional trauma and mental suffering of human beings around the world, then why did he choose the specific medium of automobile accidents and trauma? When we do think about trauma, we typically think of the ravages of war and the destruction that war creates. However, in the modern age, death and injury due to automobile and traffic accidents far outstrips death and injury due to warfare. For example, according to statistics provided by the World Health Organization, from the year 1990 to 2020, approximately 1,200,000 people died globally from wars and armed conflicts. However, during the same period, approximately 30 million people died globally from automobile and traffic accidents. Of course, that figure of 30 million people dying globally over the last 30 years does not include the trauma experienced by those seriously injured by automobile and traffic accidents. Estimates of injuries during the same period are typically 10 to 20 times higher than the death rates. All these millions upon millions of deaths and injuries leave in their wake many millions more of traumatized family members, friends, and caregivers. According to an article in the American newspaper The Washington Post, more Americans have died in car crashes since the year 2000 than in both World War I and World War II combined. According to the Journal of Emergencies, Trauma and Shock, almost 1.3 million people die annually on the roads all over the world, and between 20 to 50 million people each year sustain non-fatal injuries. Significantly, according to the World Health Organization, more than 90% of these road traffic deaths occur not in the most wealthy nations, but rather in low and middle income countries. I list these somewhat gruesome statistics not for their shock value, but to illustrate the ubiquity of physical and mental trauma resulting from automobile and traffic accidents. Millions of people around the world, often the world's most impoverished people, are regularly subjected to the traumatic physical and emotional suffering inflicted by automobile and traffic accidents. Perhaps it is Meher Baba's infinite compassion for these millions upon millions of unfortunate ones that led him to choose automobile accidents as the medium for his physical and mental suffering. To be clear, I am not suggesting that Meher Baba's universal work and his suffering were focused exclusively on trauma and mental suffering. I simply present these facts for us to consider when we attempt to understand Meher Baba's intense suffering during the final years of his life on earth. It seems that we may never fully understand the mystery of Meher Baba's universal work, nor can we fully grasp the depth and significance of his physical, mental, and spiritual suffering. We may at least take solace in his closing statement in Life Circular number 29 when he says, quote, "I want my lovers to rest assured that my humiliation and tragedy, though necessary, are but passing phases which are bound to have a glorious end as is destined. My love to all." Close quote.